In 1739, the great evangelist George Whitefield described Stonehouse as the pleasantest place I was ever at. So what was Stonehouse like 250 years ago? This was before the coming of the canal, before the railways. The two main roads through the village had been newly turnpiked, but in most other respects the district must have looked much as it had done for centuries. Devereux Hill has dominated the area from time immemorial, and half a mile to the south, the two arms of the River Frome, sometimes called the Stroudwater, flowed westwards through a fertile water meadow. The earliest settlements were probably alongside the numerous streams in the area, and on the slightly rising ground between hill and river there are signs of Roman occupation. Nowadays, wherever we look in and around Stonehouse, we find motor cars. I wonder how many of their drivers realise that they are probably following a route that has been in existence for hundreds and maybe even thousands of years. For an ancient trade route from the salt marshes on the River Severn to Minchinhampton and beyond ran right through the centre of Stonehouse. It came past the Spa Inn, down High Street and out along Pearcroft Road. Church Way is part of the track along which stone was carried from a quarry on Devereux Hill to build the earliest stone manor house. Gradually, the various farms and hamlets became linked by tracks to other settlements like Gloucester to the north, Westrip to the east, Eastington to the west, and Froster to the south. There was a ford at Ryford, and at Bridge End a pack-horse bridge dating from the 15th century carried a track towards Leonard Stanley, and a few other tracks complete the framework of roads that we can still recognise today.
The name Stonehouse can be traced back nearly 1,000 years to the Domesday Book, which refers to a place called Stanhouse, meaning quite literally a stone house. This must surely have been the manor house, for centuries the venue of the local democratic court or court leet. So this is probably why the building on the site has always been known as Stonehouse Court rather than Stonehouse Manor. In the 16th century, the property was sold to two local clothiers, and the house was rebuilt around 1601. The fireplace dates from about that time, and by the end of the 17th century, the property extended over more than 500 acres, with a great deer park in front, and ornamental gardens leading down to the river behind. Sadly, the house was destroyed by fire in 1908, but the then owner, Arthur Winterbottom, had it restored, taking advice from the noted architect Edwin Lutyens. Today, Stonehouse Court is a hotel, and substantial additions have been made to cater for the needs of modern business.
There was probably a church here, close by the manor, over 1,000 years ago, and parts of the present building, dedicated to St. Cyr, date from the 11th or 12th century. The early church was, of course, under the domination of Rome, and there is a record of tax being due to the Chepstow Priory in 1291. The first report of a vicar comes in 1270, and for many years the church lay within the diocese of Worcester. The church chest has been used to preserve the parish records of births, marriages and deaths since 1548. The pulpit was replaced in 1788 at a total cost of just under £15, and the design on the font is a copy of an early Norman ornament. This drawing was made shortly before major rebuilding work was carried out in 1854, using some of the last stone to be quarried from Doverow Hill. The tower is the only part of the building which remains untouched. In 1737, George Whitfield, who had been born in Gloucester 22 years earlier, took charge of the church for a short time, and on a return visit in 1739, he is said to have preached from a tombstone to a congregation of 3,000 people.
This is a picture of the original vicarage, built in 1684, in one of the nearest hamlets to the church at the time. The area is now called Quietways. It was replaced by this huge building in 1858. Not surprisingly, it is no longer economic to run and has been turned into flats, although its ecclesiastical origins are still clearly evident.
The Domesday Book recorded 2 mills in Stonehouse, and for centuries both arms of the river provided power to drive a number of mills along the valley. Working westwards along the river, Ebley Mill is followed by Ryford Mill, Upper and Lower Mills, Stanley Mill, Beard's Mill, and Bond's Mill. Ebley Mill, which dates from the early 14th century, used to be within the parish boundary, and makes a fine sight from the top of Doverow Hill. Stanley Mill is outside the parish boundary. Still, there is much to be seen within the parish of Stonehouse, so let us have a look at what can be found at some of these mill sites today. The name Ryford may be a corruption of Royal Ford, or it may be the place where the rye harvest was taken across the river. A river crossing is recorded from as early as 1340, and there has been a mill here since about 1500. Initially it was used for grinding corn, and later it was used for the cloth trade. The site was converted to a sawmill about 100 years ago, and the owners lived in this fine house, just the other side of the canal. The mill used to be powered by 2 water wheels, one on each end of the main building. The wheels have long gone, as has the brick chimney of the engine house that used to provide additional power, but part of the river still flows through the site. And you can still see an old crane, and one of the brackets that carried the shafts and pulleys that drove the great saws. Most of the timber was used for coffin boards. Here's the old carpenter's shop.
These cottages were built to accommodate factory workers, and this was the main entrance and office of the factory manager, built in 1896. He lived in style. The elm panelling is made from spare coffin boards.
Upper Mill has changed greatly since it was mentioned in the Domesday Book. The monks of Gloucester are reputed to have dug an additional channel to supplement the water flow to the mill in the 11th century, and the mill has been rebuilt on several occasions. For the first 50 years of this century, brushes were made on the site, but now it accommodates an industrial estate. The other mill mentioned in the Domesday Book is probably Lower Mill, which may have been the manor corn mill. Paper bags have been made here for over 50 years. Nowadays, the equipment is a bit more up to date than in this picture, taken during the last war.